All right, on to the other big story of the day. President Trump's reversal on Huawei. Over the weekend, talks at the G20 summit with President Xi Jinping, Trump announced his administration would relax the ban on the tech giant. This means U.S. tech companies can continue selling merchandise over to Huawei. But for how long? And what about all those national security concerns? For more on this developing story, let's turn now to investigative journalist Ben Swan. Ben, President Trump claims that he has reached this decision because of the pressure he was getting from U.S. tech companies, in particular Google, who's been lobbying to keep doing business with Huawei. But do you think there's more to this?
I think that I should start today by asking a question to you. What has two thumbs and was absolutely right about Huawei? This guy right here, okay? We've been talking about Huawei now for months, Manila. And every time I have said it makes no sense at all what's happening, that tech companies won't like it. I've said that Google will push back and demand that the administration reverse course. I have said that there is no national security threat here, and that the Trump administration was just using Huawei as leverage in the U.S. trade war. And every single thing that I have predicted about it so far has been correct. Because, yes, look, the Trump administration now suddenly turns around. National security concerns? There aren't any, even though they say there might be, but that's fine. We're just going to move forward anyways. Huawei is not a threat to the U.S. They're not a threat to us economically. They're not stealing our IP now. And all of a sudden, Google can do business, and any U.S. company can do business with Huawei. So everything they have said about it so far has now been erased in the last 24 hours by the Trump administration saying, never mind, go ahead, it's fine.
Okay,
no
okay, Ben. So you might have been correct on all of this, but there is one guy who's not happy about this at all. One very loud little duck in Florida, Senator Marco Rubio, not thrilled. He said over the weekend that loosening the restrictions are going to result in catastrophic mistakes. What do you think those catastrophic mistakes are they? What's he referring to?
So once again, if I'm going to be on the side of this, there's the Ben Swan side and the Marco Rubio side. I'd rather be on the Ben Swan side, right? Because Marco Rubio, again, here's a little man who likes to wave the alarm flag all the time about some terrible thing that's going to happen. He says it would be catastrophic, as you've just pointed out there. What would be catastrophic? Huawei here's what's been catastrophic for the U.S. has been the inability to be able to sway other countries through threats, through demands, through basically falsifying information about what Huawei's been doing.
Yeah.
And what the U.S. suddenly realized was other countries said, show us the evidence. They ran their own tests on it, and they said, everything you're saying is untrue, and they continue to work with Huawei. And they're not having catastrophic results. Marco Rubio is going to do this with everything. He just waves his little flag and screams that the sky is falling. He's like Chicken Little.
That's just it, though, Ben. We also have economic advisor to the White House, Larry Kudlow, who is an old TV guy himself.
Yep.
He's all over the press, including on CBS, the Sunday talk show there. He says that, they're kind of backing off these trade restrictions for Huawei. However, they're being cautious about moving forward with Huawei, that they haven't forgotten that there are some security concerns. But let me ask you this, though. They haven't provided the American public or the business world with any credible proof of why these are...
Not one piece.
Right. So how can they continue to keep playing this card but keep moving forward?
Right. Not one piece of evidence has ever been presented. And on this show, on your show, I have called for that information, that evidence, that proof to be released. Because if the U.S. government says this is a private company that is actually a threat to national security, please show us evidence. And it wasn't just to the American public, by the way, that they didn't show the evidence. The British asked to see the evidence and were not shown it. The Australians asked to see the evidence and were not shown it. The Germans asked to see the evidence and were not shown it. And so a lot of those countries have looked at this and said, well, if you can't show us evidence as to these great and gregarious claims you're making about Huawei, then we're not going to believe you. And I think as the public, we need to demand the same thing. Huawei sued the U.S. government over this, saying that U.S. law prevents the government from taking action against a private company. That's exactly what happened here. A private company was targeted and focused on. And by the way, with all of this happening now, what's going to happen with the CFO of Huawei, who is still awaiting extradition to the United States? Are they going to release her at this point, or have they decided she's a threat while the company is not?
Well, at least, Ben, we're not the only ones they're keeping this so-called evidence from. So it's not personal. It's the UK too, Australia, the Germans, everybody else. It's not just us, so we won't take it personally. And last thing on this, Ben, so since the U.S. ban on Huawei, these tech companies have kind of found ways around to kind of circumvent all these policies. What does that say about our country's rule of law, how business is conducted here?
Well, I think it says a lot, right? It says that companies can get around the law. They can get around politics more than anything else, because ultimately they're the ones who control Washington. But I also think it says something in particular about the validity of the threat here. If there was truly a national security threat and Google was working to usurp U.S. law in order to still work with this company, then Google needs to face serious consequence for that. The problem is that Google also knew there was no threat to national security here, and all of this has been a big show and a big game. So George Galloway, who just praised President Trump for having done something, I think you should give credit where credit is due. But in this case, here's the credit. President Trump absolutely was dishonest with the American people about this. His administration was dishonest, and the whole thing has now fallen apart to be shown for what it really was, a bargaining chip in his art of the deal. That's really what it was about.
We will keep watching this unfold, I'm sure, and have you back to talk about it. As always, appreciate your take on this, Ben.